try. Gotta come back to it. All right. So those are extremely important notions. They are at the core of the canon of research. They are terms that you need to simply just make a part of your entire skull in your life if you want to be a political science major. If you don't, then at leisure, throw them out. Don't worry about them. If you want to be a political science major, just remember, you have a series of courses that are cumulative in the exact same way as a science curriculum is. One builds on the other. This is the first of those courses. You go from Pol Sci 215, you're going to take what you learn here. You cannot throw it away. You must retain it in order to be successful in Pol Sci 310. We add to it, and you must retain all of that for 591. And along the way, I'm hoping that you will take 535. It's not required, but I would recommend to you, you just make sure you take it. Yeah? All right. But those three on the top are required. They are the core sequence. So let me just put it to you in this manner. If you want a degree from Creighton University, you must have a major. If that major is to be political science, you have no choice about those three. You have choice about everything else but those three. These are the most, for a political science major therefore, or for a graduate, somebody wants to graduate with a Pol Sci major, this is it. There are no other more important courses. So what I'm saying is you sacrifice for those courses. Otherwise, you sacrifice your potential graduation or academic career. Now, I'm okay with you not wanting to be a Pol Sci major. I'm fine with it. That's great. But those of you that I'm speaking to are Pol Sci majors, that's it. That's it right there. You can't screw these courses up. There is no turning back. So we will have, on occasion, a senior who will forget, well, I don't know how this happens, that they have to take this in fall. We don't offer in spring, and we don't do it in summer, and we don't have mulligans and retakes. It's it. So in the fall of your senior year, this is what you're doing. You're not traveling abroad, you're not doing anything but your 591. Does that make sense? Just keep that in your heads, okay? The second thing is, don't fail that course. We will have a senior on occasion who will. It's not very often, but we get it. We do not give mulligans. None. Okay? So, if that's not your cup of tea, I'm not trying to be an ass. I'm just trying to make sure you know what you're headed into. That's all I'm doing. Nothing more. So those are the rules of the game. And we just do not give clemency. You must successfully conquer 591, which is a mastery of the entire sequence. Okay? So as long as you're straight on that, then you understand where your priorities, I think, should be, but it's up to you as to where you put your priorities. Does that make sense? But these things that we're talking about, the ones we just went over, what is political science? What is explanation? What is an independent variable? What is a dependent variable? What is a hypothesis? What is a theory? They carry over all the way to 591. And what happens is, if you have trouble in 215, you will have trouble in 310 until you get those things. Because you have to understand not only their definitions, but what they really mean, how to use them, how to create from it, yeah? And then, if you're having trouble in 310, I have a couple of students now that are having trouble in 591. And it is iffy if they're going to pass. And they're going to put everything they got into it. And this semester, there's nothing else going on for them. One of them quit his job. Another one decided, heck with the LSAT. I can't afford the LSAT. Because they are not where they need to be. And so I think they're making good choices now. I would have liked to have made different choices earlier, but they make the good choices now. They're making those sacrifices. So, think about it. Keep that in your head. Lots of other majors out there, they don't have the same ground rules we have. I happen to think that is the political science. That's what the benefit is. I've already given that speech. I won't give it to you again. But that's what we're about. If you want to go to law school, you do not have to be a political science major. You do not. You can get any kind of major and go to law school. If you want to go and be in politics, you do not have to have a political science major. You can study politics in the history department. You can study politics in the philosophy or the theology department. We do not study politics per se. We study the causality of political phenomena. We do not train politicians. We don't train lawyers. We have a lot of people who become lawyers and become politicians. But that's not what we are doing. We are training analysts. Does that make sense? Is everybody with me? Okay, good. Good. So here we are. You got 215. This is what you're in now. This is called the epistemology of science. And what does epistemology mean? It means, how do we know? It's the philosophy of how do we know. So you are learning philosophically how we create knowledge, how we know things. And it's pretty much the same as it is in the hard sciences. It is radically different from the humanities. And that's what distinguishes the social science and the natural sciences from the humanities. All right? Is that we use the scientific paradigm. Now, it's not that everybody, everywhere, at all times, in all places do that. But the harder you get in the science, the more it is. It's absolute the way it is. So, for instance, in social sciences, when you get into economics, if you don't do this, you aren't. In sociology, you can get away with a lot more. In anthropology, you can dance with anything you want to do. In political science, it comes at a cost to you, but we're kind of a mid-ground. But in our department, there's no middle ground. Here it is. So we got the epistemology of science. How do we know what we know? The canon of research. Or analysis, if you prefer. In terms of its applied cousin or sister. All right. Now, 310 is methodology, methods. Right? This is how we know. Now, what are the methods for our knowing? And we focus here on the standard tool, if you will, in the social sciences in the 2000s. And that standard tool is called OLS, or regression analysis. Ordinary least squared regression. It is a statistical procedure, mathematical procedure, that is based in probability theory in terms of its application, not in its design. It is straightforward statistics, but how we apply it is we use probability theory. That's what you learn in 310. The application of statistical methods. All right. These are the same statistical methods that they use across the river in the casinos to figure out how much. What the odds are, how much they need to charge you, how much money they're going to make given the odds, those kinds of things. Same kind of thing. But we use probability theories in order to say, okay, we know that there are odds, what's the probability, what's the probability we will accept to say that we, as you'll learn, reject the null hypothesis. What does that mean? That we're wrong. We reject the fact we're wrong. It doesn't mean we say we're right, we just simply say we're not wrong. All right? All right. And then 591 is senior thesis. And I've said this before, it is equivalent of an MA, a master's degree thesis. And so that's the value added of a great political science major in the marketplace, right there. You're walking out, you are competitive, not just on the scorecard, but you're competitive in your head. You're competitive in your soul. You are definitely competitive in terms of how you understand things at the master's level. You are far more competitive than your undergraduate competitors out there, unless they come from very small schools and just happen, like Gustavus Adolphus. You don't have to do this, but you can. At UNO, you can't even do it if you want to. They don't even offer it. Okay? All right. So there we are. All right. So that gives you your market advantage in my view. All right, so that's sort of a rerun, but I think it's an important rerun. I said this earlier in the course. I think it makes more sense now. Okay, so let's talk a bit about this process. Let's go to your book. Let's go to page 249. 249. Yes? Okay, I'll find it. Okay, are you on 249? All right, now, there's a table here, and it's a table that are the results of an OLS regression model, which you're going to learn how to do in 310. My purpose at this point is just to simply point out that what we are doing is we are looking here for causality. Cause of what? Well, the cause of what we're looking for is nowhere in the table proper. It is mentioned in the title. So what is it we're trying to explain? What is the phenomenon in the title that we are trying to explain? Table 7.2. There. What is it we're trying to explain? Yes?
The probability that a country will be a democracy this year if it was a dictatorship last year.
Correct. Did we see that? Now, what are the explanatory variables? What are they categorically? Not individually, but as a broad set. What are they? They're also mentioned in the title. What are they? Yes?
Cultural and economic determinants.
Okay, so it's saying the word determinants. So it's getting away from probability, but in fact, it really is probability. Because determinants would mean deterministic. If it happens, it's 100% sureness. No, it's not 100%. There's a statistical probability attached to it. Okay? So, what this table does is it goes at this and determines the statistical probability of each of those factors. How statistically strongly are they related to democracy occurring when it occurred the previous year in the country? Which of these factors, individually, are the strongest fit? See the question? That's what's being reported here, and this is what we do. Now, it's done this way because this is the dominant method as we sit here in 2018 or 17, on the verge of 18. And so we're learning about how to do it, but when we talk about it specifically, we're only using one method. But there's nothing magic about this one method. There are lots of other methods out there, as long as what? As long as they give us a notion of correlation that's wrapped up in a test of a hypothesis that has a theory behind it. That's the key. So there's nothing magic about it. However, there will be nothing unmagic about it for you for the next 2-3 years. This is what you're going to learn. And this is what you're going to come out, and you're going to be exceptionally well tooled because you will be, like I said, at the MA level in the market, and as a BIA in business intelligence analytics, you will be able to do this crap all day long. But it's like pot. It's a gateway drug. It's not everything. And it's actually not that powerful. There are lots of other things we could do. They're a lot more fun than OLS regression. They will get at questions. But I will leave those for later discussions. But along the 2 to 3 years you have left, you will forget what I just said, and it will make no sense to you whatsoever. When it will make sense to you is when you get out in the market and you start thinking about it. You've been out there 2, 3, 4 years, hopefully just a couple of months, but for some of you maybe a decade or 2. And you'll start asking yourself, there's got to be a better way to do this because this is so fraught with in some cases, ridiculous notions of how we have to make this to work. Why are we pounding the square peg in the round hole? And you're doing it because you're fixated on a single method. There are a lot more methods, but we're going to focus on the dominant, overwhelmingly dominant, I mean overwhelmingly dominant method. Now, as we sit here today though, just to go back, it's a farce. Because while it's overwhelmingly dominant today, it is only that because that's what people are trained to do and that's what they do. It's like the notion that I was brought up on that the Soviet Union is the greatest threat to the United States. It was a farce then, and it is a farce now. There's nothing real about it. Any more than that is where we are. Where we are is called Google. We are in the midst of a revolution. an information and methodological revolution, the likes of which we haven't seen since statistical probability at the beginning of the 19th century. And I am not overstating things. As a matter of fact, I may have grossly understated them. So I throw that out there. Hopefully it stays with you. But the world that you are going to enter into is already not this world. We are already way beyond this. So you're asking me, so why are you teaching this to me? Because I have to. So why am I telling you these things? Because I owe it to you. This is already 5 to 10 years old. It's already dead. But we are going to train armies of people, and I say armies, already small numbers, but armies of people in this when we should be training them in data science, but we can't get there. Why? Because humans are shit slow and dumb as hell, and collectively we're dumber. Now some of you, that goes up against your primary theology of life and your whole philosophy of life. Sorry. Weigh it, take a look at it, but that's my answer to you. We are run, or the world is run by mediocrities, and the mediocrities rule. Okay, so here we are with the oil suppression chart that's now 5 to 10 years old. It's a methodology. But if we can learn it, there is a benefit, and the benefit is we understand what it is we're trying to do, and maybe that's not the way to do it. Maybe there's a better way. Get my point? But at least we're learning what we're supposed to do, right? And what we have is on the left column, those are the, notice that? Independent variables, magic word. Now you know what that means. All right? The next columns over, say Model 1, Model 2, Model 3, Model 4, Model 5. There's nothing magic about the word model. Every time you press the button on the computer and run a regression, you're running a model, because you have identified a dependent variable and a set of independent variables. If the set of independent variables is in any way modified or different from any of the previous runs, it is a distinct model. Notice that's what models 1 through 5 are. Notice there are blank spaces. That's because they didn't test those independent variables in that model. That's what distinguishes it from the other models. So each model is a different set, and while it could be similar, it's not exactly the same set of independent variables as the previous or other model. Is everybody with me? So there's nothing magic about this, but this is important for you when you get to 591, that you understand what we're talking about when we say, how many models are you going to test? Otherwise, we're sitting here all day long trying to figure that out. Here it is. This person tested how many models? 5. Okay? And what variables did he test in each case? Well, they're the ones for which we have a column entry in that row for that independent variable. All right? Now, at the bottom, he put in things that are not related, okay, to the test per se, because they're not independent variables, but they're outcomes. For instance, the constant. That's the intercept of the line. That's all it's saying. More importantly is the number of observations, and then something called the log likelihood. The log likelihood is going to give us the statistical probability of the entire model. If we look up, however, in each model, and we look, let's say, model 1, and we look from Muslim majority, we see a number there at the intersection. It says minus 0.28, double asterisk, under it, parentheses 0.12. This is the standard way in which statistical regression analytical results are reported. It's a bit strange. The first number, okay, is the beta. That we are fitting a line and you'll notice that I've changed this slightly from this. This is the intercept, this is the slope. We like to call these betas, not LA, we call it beta. All we did was just change the terms names to the constants. So we have a beta. What you're seeing reported at the intersection of the independent variable with the model is the beta. Underneath it, we're getting something called the standard error in parentheses reported to it. We don't want to get into it now, but if we had plotted the actual data, they might look something like that. And what we did was, we said, that's the line that best fits those data. That line has a slope, and it has an intercept. Now, each of these observations is a distance on the y-axis, which is the dependent variable. There's a distance from them to what we are now going to estimate they are on the line. Because if you put that x, whatever that is, in here, you will get, if you put this x in there, let's say we do this one right here, we'll call it x sub 1, then you get exactly that y sub 1. That's the estimate. But the actual one, in reality, may be off the line here. So there's some error in our estimation. So what we do is we have a standard error. How far off the line are the actual points? Does that make sense? So we're imparting the standard error. The bigger the standard error, the lousier the prediction. Now it turns out, if we divide the beta by the standard error, we're going to get something called the t-score. Let's not worry about this today, we'll worry about it next semester. But a t-score has a really neat property. It gives us a probability of this happening once we apply probability theory to it, which I won't describe to you today, but let's just simply say it gives you a probability estimate. And it will tell me what's the chance of that occurring random. Is it a 5% chance that was random? Or is it a 90% chance it was random? Random means no pattern. Non-random, therefore, must mean there's a pattern. If I'm saying something is causal, am I assuming a pattern or non-pattern? I'm assuming a pattern. So it must not be random. Right? It can't be random. Random, if it were truly random, if I took all the x's and y's and plotted them, it would look like this. That's random. That's not, because it looks like a line. There's a pattern. It is not random. That is random. I am saying that I have a causal relationship. It should be not random. So what is the probability that it is random? See the point? That's what we're doing here. That's what's being reported to us. Again, if I take that beta, which in the first instance, again, the Muslim majority for model 1, that beta is negative 0.28. And the standard error in parentheses is 0.12. Now the cool thing is, like I said, if you divide the beta by the standard error, it has a really cool property statistically. If it comes out to be higher than 2, which this is, 0.28 divided by 0.12 is higher than 2. 2 times 0.12 would be 0.24. If it's higher than 2, then the probability that it's occurring by chance is only 5%. So it's likely not random. And the higher it gets, the less likely it's random. So that's what I'm doing, and that's why there are double asterisks there. And if you look down at the bottom of the page, that double asterisk says something about p is less than 0.05. The probability of that occurring by chance is less than 5%. That's all that's saying. All right, so we had a short foray into 310, but we took it there because we want to get a finer understanding of hypothesis testing. That's what we're doing here. We're testing this hypothesis. Somebody has thought that those variables on that left side, which are causal, not deterministic, but they're probabilistically causal, all right, that they are causal. Now, here's, if you will, the bitch. For some of you, but for me, it's the fun. How are they causal? That's called what? We're no longer talking about the hypothesis directly, but we are now directly talking about what? No? Theory. All right, now look at those causal variables. Just look at it. Muslim majority, Protestant majority, Catholic majority, GDP per capita, growth in GDP per capita, oil production, effective number of ethnic groups. That means how many do you actually have, you know, like not in terms of, it's not like a count, like where you go, well, in the United States we have 52,000 ethnic groups, but are they equal in size? So saying them at 52,000 is nice, but it doesn't give us a sense of their weighting. What we want to know is their weight so we can figure out, well, how many effective ethnic groups do we have if we're really talking about how much influence each of them might have. So we would expect, for instance, African Americans and Hispanics to be virtually each one a one, whereas we would expect something like Somalis to be like a 0.001 or something, right, in weight. So when we do that, we're not going to have 52,000 anymore. We might have 6.5, of which Hispanics and African Americans are each one. And all the rest are like, add them up, or little tiny pieces, 52,000s, and you know. Okay, so we got some Azeris, 0.000000001. We added them in the group. Here we got some Pashtuns. Add a couple of more O's before you put the 1 in there, right? See, do you get my point? That's called the effective number, yeah? When there's an interesting little mathematical formula to do that. We do that with political parties as well. We could also do it, and do here, religious groups. And I'm not sure how this would be different from religious and ethnic groups, but somehow they also have cultural groups distinct from those too. All right? And that's fine. See all? Give me one theory. One. I'm not asking you to do it, but I want you to think about it. Give me one theory that wraps all those variables up into a nice little argument. How do all those fit together? GDP per capita, growth in GDP per capita, oil production, Muslim majority, Protestant majority, effective number of ethnic groups. Put it all together in a single theory for me. We're explaining democracy. These things are probabilistic determinants. How? I'm sure somebody has a theory, right? I mean, you live in a world full of monumental geniuses led by the best and brightest. Oh, I'm getting really nasty right now. Sorry about that. The cream always rises to the top. Yeah.
Would one such example be like the one in the book where they talked about a civic culture that was a combination of like religious and economic factors that make people like more receptive?
Okay, but what would be the economic factors?
They say you have to have like an industrialized economy,
Okay.
move away from like traditional values,
Okay,
modernized ones.
good. So what we're saying is you have to have a civic culture that has some values that may be taken from some religious systems. And therefore, we want to see what percentage of population is in each of these, and what fragmentation score you give to dominant whatever, right? And you want to make sure that you have some homogeneity ethnically, yeah, so that you don't have like actual 52,000 and what, 6 people each, and you can't agree on anything. And then we're going to have GDP per capita, right? My response? That is a theory that is a little more than the hypothesis itself. It's just a restatement of the hypothesis, isn't it? You have to have these things for democracy. We're just now going to call them civic culture. Does that make sense? We put a label on it and it all of a sudden makes it cool. Right? Very good. That was very good. She actually read the book, came back with it, looked at it. Excellent. Can you give me a theory? Well, good luck, because no one has. And they've been trying for 50 to 70 years. This goes back to the paradigm. Remember the paradigm discussion? These are largely behavioralist. These are values and attitudes. Why? Because behavioralism simply says that attitudes, values, and beliefs, which we now give a fancy term called political culture, not civic, but political, in another form, but civic culture in the one that you read is correct. But we call it political culture. And it's a set of attitudes, values, and beliefs that are widely distributed across a population. And for that reason, we would like to know the fragmentation score of ethnic groups because we assume that they have very different values. So we want to know, okay, if it's like a 6, that's less problematic than a 52,000, right? Because we only have like 6 major competitive ideas maybe going at it, or effectively something like that, right? Right? So it's saying attitudes, values, and beliefs determine what people do. And the distribution across a political system, and this gives birth to the public opinion survey industry in America in the 1950s and 40s. This idea. I've said this before, I'm just repeating myself. All right? So that's why we have Gallup. And we assume, right, that people act in accordance with their values. But we assume that they do so because those values are culturally determined, not individualistically determined as a rational or reasonable sit down with your life self, look in the mirror and ask yourself what you really want out of life. But no, this is given to you by your culture. That's why I got Islam, I've got Protestantism, I've got Catholicism, ethnic groups count, religiosity, religious group counts. Why? Because this is supposed to determine what the mass of people in that group will believe. Then I add economics to it, and it gives me what? Clearly, to be what? Economic groups. And of course, we know that all rich people vote Democrat, and all well-to-do vote Republican, and all poor vote Democrat. And that may be statistically true, but that's not true of everybody. Any more than it's true that all NFL football players are going to take the knee. Not true. Or that they all would if they had a choice. It's more likely that maybe a majority might, but it says nothing about what an individual might do or what the percentage is. So we have behavioralism that kind of clusters us into these groups and assumes that we act the same in those groups. Women vote Democrat. African Americans vote Democrat. Okay? If it were true that women voted Democrat, Donald Trump would not be president today. In some sense, if you could argue that women put him in the White House. Certainly, certain groups of them certainly did. So we sit here and we ask ourselves, okay, so how much power does that give us? Well, I don't know, but I've got a problem with that, but I got a bigger problem because I can't get a theory. That's really problematic. So I have a problem with behavioralism in general because I can't get good theory. I can get some, yes. When we get to economics, later we're going to be able to get some, but I'm going to get rid of all the cultural stuff. I can't get a good theory of culture at all, of any sort whatsoever. And that's highly problematic for me in my own personal life, in my own career, let's say. Personal life's wrong, but let's say my own career. Although, to be frank, I mean, this is what I am, so I guess it's my personal life as well. I don't know. But I was a culturalist. I went to the University of Illinois and got my PhD in Soviet area studies. I'm an area studies guy. By definition, that makes me a culturalist. I explain things as a function of cultural values and norms. That's what I was taught to do. I graduated from the University of Illinois in 1992. I came here in 1993. By 2000, and by late 90s, 1998, 1999, I was having a serious problem. I had two very, very serious problems. One, I couldn't come up with an original question. And two, which was even worse, I couldn't figure out what culture had to do with anything. Now the two go together. Because the reason I couldn't figure out what culture had to do with anything was I couldn't figure out a theory behind it. And because I had no theory, I had no questions. So I'm going back to theory again. I have come to conclude that if you want questions, you must have theory. And I don't think culture and behavioralism is very fertile ground for theory. Are there other ways we can go? Yes, we will be getting there soon. But it's kind of like, for some of you to be like string theory in physics. Hard. There's nothing hard about behavioralism except for it creates laziness of the mind. Or can. Let me give you why. So, here we have, in the same literature, the argument that, the general argument is you cannot have democracy unless you have a history of democracy. That's the general argument that comes out of the culturalist norm. That, by the way, flies in the face of political correctness because it purposefully means that if you accept the fact that democracy is a superior form of government, that they're inferior cultures. I don't think anybody wants to go there in the present era. Right? I mean, that's what you're doing. And yet the New York Times is so intellectually lazy that they will literally print on their front pages that Iraq can never be a democracy, right? And then, within several months or whatever, argue vociferously that anybody who said that Islam is not conducive to democracy is a racist or an Islamophobe. But what was the argument for Iraq not being that? Their history defined by what? Their culture. What's their culture defined? Islam. It's intellectual laziness. See this? Incoherency. Dare I say it? Stupidity. I mean, it makes you want to throw up when you see it, right? So then you sit there and you go, all right, well, it's the same argument that I made, my own intellectual stupidity. So I actually was writing on exams and watching historians make arguments about you can't have democracy without democratic past, or have some sort of democratic interlude that's brought to you by war. So I'm going, the Mongols came in and they were inherently anti-democratic, that the very point at which the Enlightenment began to take root in Europe, or was going to take root in Europe in the Middle Ages, they were put under the Mongol yoke, separated, and so they have no history of democratic values coming from the West because of their separation. They can never become Democrats. Hopeless. How? And then you argue. However, in the North, there was this place called Novgorod the Great. And Novgorod was a great trade center. And it was ahead of its day. And of course, not everybody got to vote, but they had a town council of not the elders, but of the businesses and tradesmen. And they voted. And here you can see the core of democratic nurturing beginning in Russia. You see the difference in those arguments, you see the difference of the arguments. And when did those arguments take place? In a 6-month period called Gorbachev and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And now all of a sudden you have to make an argument for why the Soviet Union could not be a democracy. Now all of a sudden it was Russia could be. So we have to go back and find that cultural root in the Vesh of Novgorod. You see what I'm saying? And I did that. And you know, I stopped myself right in the middle and I dropped my pen And I argued with them, I can't do this, I cannot do this. So I sat there and said, what is it? If we're saying that you have to have democratic values, all right, forget the past. What do they sound like? What are the values you must subscribe to? What do you support? All right? Well, competitive ideas. One. Going back to that whole notion of what? Schumpeter, yeah? Competitions before elites for political office, the outcomes of which are determined by the public. It is rendered moot competition when there is no free flow of ideas, when we shut ideas de facto, a priori off. No matter how, and this is the argument of the forefathers, no matter how repulsive, yes? We don't shut them off. Otherwise, we have rendered democracy moot, and we have given to some tribunal the right to determine what is thinkable. Well, I thought that was us. Does that make sense? So therefore, we have to allow freedom of speech, right? We're going to have allow freedom of association, so we can have organizational political parties to make those speeches broader, and Hitler is going to be right out there, and the brown shirts right out with in Weimar Germany, right on the streets with the communists. Then the both of them will be out there together with the anarchists, and they'll be there with the what? The Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, and they'll all be out there organizing and doing what? Protesting and stating their position. But that's not what's important, that they're doing it or not doing it. The fact that we have communists or fascists doing it, it's not the problem. The issue is whether or not they can. That seems to be the crux of the matter. And that means we have to have a true multi-party system, where we don't say, a priori, these parties are gone. Now, there's a difference between freedom of speech and freedom of action. If we have a party that insists that they can eat fingers of dead people in public, I think that's a different thing from a party that says that we should have the right to do that. You know what I'm saying? And what is it? It's freedom of speech, not action, per se. Yeah? The acts are subject to law. That's what the debate's about. Yeah? That's what the debate is about. And maybe we're going to make it legal to eat people's fingers on the street. We can kill people so we can have fingers to eat. I don't know. That's what the Satanists would want. Great. Wonderful. I'm opposed to them. Hope you are too. But I'm not opposed to them saying it. In fact, I'd rather say it so I can look at them and know who they are. Are you kidding me? Please don't shut up. Whatever you do, don't shut up. Please tell me where you are. I want to see you. I want to sort you out in the crowd, right? I want to go, okay, hey, listen. We want to listen to this idiot. I think he's got important things to say. Come on up, you idiot. Talk. Talk. You're my best friend. Right? All right? So that's what we want. So I sat there and thought about this in this period of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and asked myself, that seems to me what the culturalists are trying to get at. These kinds of things. But is there a theory in it? Well, it's more of a definition about what democracy is. But there may be some theory that we have, but it's pretty thin. It's all about democracy, it's competitive, whatever, but it's pretty much definitional on the basis of the values. And so it becomes like a chicken and egg or a circular tautology, you know what I'm saying? But I went with that because it made more sense to me than anything else. So I sat there and I looked at Gorbachev in his entire period of perestroika. And I went through all of his writings. I went through all of his actions. And I concluded he was not a Democrat. And I concluded that therefore this revolution that had occurred, that he didn't create, it got out of control. He lost control. I couldn't find any Democrats. And so I concluded that nothing that Gorbachev had done was democratic, and that the Soviet Union was not going to become a democracy. And that I was not going to say anything about Russia, but I saw little hope unless something were to emerge out of a turbulent history that was, or a period that was above ahead of it. And the editor refused to publish it because it went against every known fact. And the fact was, Gorbachev is one of the greatest Democrats in the world, and we're about ready to give him coronation and unbelievable awards in the West for being what? A total idiot who lost control of his country. The damn thing fell apart. He didn't intend that. So anyway, it was a couple of years later when all of a sudden public opinion turned with a strange beast called Putin. And all of a sudden, Russia was no longer that democracy we went. So I wrote a nice little letter to the editor, said, think we missed one, that one. And he wrote me back, said, yes, it's not the first or the last one I'll miss. And that's what happens when you go with majority rule. So, long foray about theory. What it can do for us, what it can't do, right? And the problem of lazy theory, where you make the same argument from different, you use the same historical data or slightly modified, and you make two different conclusions, and you yourself didn't even realize it. And they are logically incoherent. That means they're bullshit. It means everything you said is bullshit. And I don't know about you, but boy, that's not the reputation I want in the workplace. So I've been starting thinking about it. Good theory lies at the center of all debate. It lies at the center of all discussion. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to adopt a theory and become like intransigent. You can't change it. No. When the theory is wrong, get rid of the damn thing or modify it. And that's what we do with good theory. That's what theory's about. But everything we do focuses on theory. So, I'm working on human trafficking. So we have a theory of trafficking. Why do we have it? Now, this is not the most intricate theory in the world. We have some better, but this basically is human trafficking is a part of the commercial sex market. There is a demand for commercial sex. There is not enough supply, and there's too high a demand. That incentivizes people to do what? Force involuntary labor onto the market to meet the demand. Hence, trafficking. Now that sounds pretty simple, and in fact it is at its kind of not its core, but at that level. But that now brings with it what? All of economics. All of economics to the table. Whoa! Are you kidding me? So that gets at the notion of, it's a market. They have to advertise to their market. How big is their market? Well, their market is huge. It goes across the entire United States. So they must advertise openly. They must do this, right? And they must find a way to reach their customer base, which they know is bigger than a particular part of the city. It's the whole city. It's the whole country. It's rural areas and it's whatever. Because we have no theory that tells us that there are more men buying sex in certain parts of the city of Omaha than there are in other parts of like Grand Island. There is no such theory. We have none. So we have accepted the fact that the demand for sex is randomly distributed across men. At what percent, we have no idea, but we have no way to predict whether or not a person is more likely to be a consumer sex than another. We don't know. We just don't on the demand side. It's something we're trying to work on, but we don't have a theory there. So we're going with random distribution. All right, if it's random, they have to have a means to reach it. They need an advertising tool. Walking on the streets is not a good advertising tool when you're trying to reach West O, because you're not going to walk on the streets of West O. Does that make sense? So you need something better than that. So where are they going to go? They're going to go online. That's where the advertising is, because you can't get the newspapers, because they're not going to sell you space, right? So it's pretty much online, because that's the Klondike in terms of you can advertise. Now the question is, all right, where will they go online? They're going to focus on a single online source. Why? Folks, they've got to reach their customers. Their customers cannot be overly complicated. We're trying to figure out, golly, which of the 25 online sources am I going to find the best product on? See what I'm saying? It's the whole notion in economics where we know. Have you ever noticed that Menards, Lowe's, and Home Depot have this maddening likelihood of all being located in exactly the same place? Why? Makes it easier for the customers to coordinate where to go when they need this stuff. Commercial sex. What's the one place you go? That's what it is. It's just economics. See this? So all of a sudden I'm going, a single source. Sounds cool. So where else can we go from this? A lot of places. I just give you some examples. But once you get into a theory, this can be very rich, and economic theory is exceptionally rich. And so we can go enormous directions. You get a huge swath of understanding the market, and then trying to figure out, how do we get at it? Do you attack supply? Do you attack demand? Do you attack the advertising vendor? What do you attack? Well, economic theory will give you some hints, some broad hints of what you go at there, as to how to deconstruct this market. But do you have to ask yourself, what part of the market do you want to deconstruct? The entire thing is illegal. Do you want to get rid of all of it? Or do you want to get rid of the involuntary commercial sex? Those are two different issues. You may not be able to get both of them. All right, and it gets more complicated than that. So, this is where the fun is. I know, commercial sex, but the fun is in the theory. It's in the thinking through the theory. It drives everything else. It drives all the questions, all the tests, all the restrict thinking. That's where it's at. And that's where it is at any place of work that's going somewhere. That's the way it was, I can tell you, in the intelligence community, not at the bottom of the pit, but at the echelons at which it really matters. They are not debating facts. They're not sitting there bringing the facts to the table. They're debating the theories, the general story, and they're bringing the facts to try to make their case. Does that make sense? But it's the story. It's the story that's driving everything. You want to know how to get rid of recidivism among foster care children? Get a story. Not a bunch of facts. Get the story. And the story will tell you where to go. Can we get rid of it if we intervene? If we have a system right now that pretty much waits until you're 13 to 15 years old before we decide whether or not you should go into foster care. At 6 and 8, we have some markers that suggest that maybe we should intervene, but we're going to let it sit there until it becomes very, 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 very clear. The data, the story is starting to tell us that at that point, by the time you're 15 to 16, there's nothing we can do for you. You're screwed up. I won't get into the theory, but you can see my point, right? We're going to have to intervene earlier. Now the question is, oh my gosh, you want to take away these children that early in life and maybe be wrong? Oh crap. There's plenty for researchers now right there for 30 years. Your whole life you could spend just researching those sets of issues. How do I increase the probability of determining that this child at 6 is virtually 100% assured, right, that they are going to be abused to the point where they are going to suffer extreme mental difficulties. And they are not going to be able to have a full life. How do I raise that probability? Because I'm not sure I want to take them out until I get close to 100%. Because that 5% error may be too much. You know what I'm saying? Because of the social costs. Yeah? See what I'm saying? In terms of just personal freedom as well. So that's enough right there for an entire career for armies of people. Everybody in this class could do that for 30 to 50 years and spend their whole life just answering that question. Just that. And you would be working constantly on the theory behind it. Constantly generating hypothesis testing, asking the whys, the causality. All right. So the importance of theory cannot overstate it. Many of you believe I have understated it. To be honest. All right. So, we looked at the book here, and we got this stuff, we got these tables, we know how to interpret them, we now understand that this is just a test, but what's really this a test of is our theoretical thinking, and that we will rebuild based on the results, and then go back and do it again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And that's why the fun has to be in the theory. Because if it's in the testing, you'll wonder if you're ever going to get done, and the answer is no, you will not. Okay, let's spend a few minutes now talking about three political systems and institutional design. We've got the United States. I think, everybody gets that, So what if we did it this way? What if we go, we've got France and Great Britain, and I want to take a look at the differences in institutional design, differences in similarity. We'll focus mostly on differences. I'm going to do that because I think institutional differences have a lot to do with what outcomes are, not culture. So I'll say we say the U.S. and then we'll have a UK and then we'll have France. Okay? So we have the executive branch in the United States, and we like to call it the executive branch. And then we have the legislative branch, and then we have the judicial branch. And that's, the typical civics in America. It doesn't work real well in these other countries, but works perfectly for us. So, the key institution in the executive branch in the United States is the
President.
To make sense of what's going on in the UK and France, we have to understand, however, that that's something that the president performs two roles. He's the head of government, and he's the head of state. In the UK, is there a single executive?
No.
No. Who's the head of state?
The monarch,
A monarch. Who's the head of government?
the prime minister.
Prime minister. What about France? They have a president. Is he head of government and head of state?
Head of the state.
Head of state. But he also has some head of government functions. So, in France, the president, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense reports to the president, not to the prime minister. So the other head of government is the prime minister, who's focused primarily on domestic policy. The president is focused on foreign policy in his government role. So the president in France is the head of state, but he also has some government functions. And the prime minister is only head of government. Right? So, we are starting to separate between these three systems already. Because you see, these are not the United States, UK, and France as much as they are archetypes of a type system. And the United States is the archetype of what we call presidentialism. UK, and there are other presidential systems. All of Latin America. Nigeria, we're going to look at it later in the course. Lots of presidential systems across the world, and they are structured very similar to the United States, where the president is both head of state and head of government. All right? What about the UK? This is the archetype parliamentarism. Lots of parliamentary systems in the world, but in general, you have the distinction of the head of state and head of government, and the head of state doesn't have any government policy responsibilities, formally. So Japan fits into this. Germany fits into this. Israel fits into this. They are parliamentary. France is semi-presidential. Here, while you appear to have something that looks like parliamentarism, the head of state does have some government responsibilities. And it turns out that a state will also have a relationship to the legislature that is lacking in parliamentarism or presidentialism. So let's take a look at the legislature. All right? How many houses are there in the legislature in all three systems? Two. So we can't distinguish between them in a number of houses. And in all three, there's an upper house and a lower house. Now these come to us pretty much out of the development of the notion of democracy, which is rooted in the development of the notion of putting a check on monarchs in Europe. And it begins not with the lower house, but it begins with the empowerment of the nobility, the landed nobility. Not the rich, not the famous. It did not include merchants, it did not include clergy, it included the landed nobility from the feudal era. And these, beginning with the Magna Carta in England and in other documents in other countries, the revolutions in France and places like this, with either revolution or evolution across Europe, monarchies were restricted in their powers by the nobility. And what they ended up having was a house, a parliament, initially, that was now come down to us from Great Britain as the House of Lords. Now, because of that beginning, we tend to think about each house, or in two parliamentary systems, or not just parliamentary, but democratic systems where you have two legislative houses. We always think about one as the upper house, because it doesn't represent the people. It represents, in Great Britain, in historical development across Europe, classes, the upper class. In the United States, it represents the states. It's the Senate. And to this day, the Senate is still not representative of the people, even though it's now elected by the people in a country, in a state. Think about this. Nebraska has 2 senators with 1.5 million people, and California has 2 senators with 50 million. We have more representation than they have. It's unequal and unfair if this were to be representative of the people. It is not. It is representative of something higher than the common person. It is representative of the notion of states in our system. Again, historically evolved. In Great Britain, it's representative of the nobility. In many other parliamentary systems across Europe, it's the same thing. In France, because of the revolutionary spirit, it wouldn't be the nobility, because they decimated the nobility, unlike lots of other places which sort of just sort of made their peace with it. Okay? But what the French have, though, is the notion that, okay, we're going to have again, subnational units. We're going to have the departments. We're going to have pieces, Burgundy, Normandy, Paris itself. They're going to be represented apart from the common person. And the lower house represents the commoner. That comes in the 20th century. Now the common person gets a vote. Now, as it turns out, that lower house in most political systems is more powerful than the upper house, but not always. It's more powerful because the lower house elects what? In parliamentary and semi-presidential systems, the lower house elects what?
The Prime Minister?
Right. It elects the government. Not so in presidentialism. Who elects the government in presidentialism? The population in the electorate. Yeah? But in semi-presidential and parliamentarism, the lower house, almost all the time, some exceptions, elects the government, but does not necessarily elect the head of state. The head of state could be hereditary, as it is in many constitutional monarchies like Denmark, Sweden, yeah, or Spain, or it could be elected by some sort of a convention, as it is in Germany. In France, semi-presidentialism, what you find is the president is popularly elected. So semi-presidentialism, the head of state is elected, the prime minister is by the populace, the prime minister is elected by the legislature. Who elects the lower house? The population. Is it the case that the upper house is always elected by the population? No. It is not. It could be appointed, it could be hereditary. It could be appointed by the states, as it was in the United States for most of our existence, or not most of it, half of it. So, the upper house is distinct from that lower house. In two of these systems, the lower house elects the government. In presidentialism, it does not. Okay? Now, the lower house elects the government, and it can do what? End the tenure of the government earlier than its otherwise constitutionally mandated term. So in Great Britain, the term of a government is 5 years. But Parliament can vote the government out early. Now that hardly ever happens in Great Britain because they have a tradition, and they have also an outcome in most elections where it's a single party rule. One party is the absolute majority. Now they've had something a break from that right now. Last several years, Theresa May is the prime minister and she is the head of a coalition. So the Liberal Democrats are in coalition with the Conservatives. They were that way before Theresa May. Okay? It's been a period of time. David Cameron was the prime minister who put together the original coalition. But this is a very unusual period for the British. They normally always have majoritarian government. That is, one government where one party is the government. The prime minister and all of his cabinets come from one party, and they have a majority in the legislature. Yeah? Majoritarian government. That's not the case in France or Italy, almost anywhere else in Europe, and most other parliamentary or even semi-presidential systems. They will have multi-party systems. And they will have coalitional governments. We have to ask ourselves, why? Why does Britain, and there's another country on the board, what other country also does not have a multi-party system? The United States. Why do we in Great Britain not have a multi-party system, but France does, and so does Germany, and so do most of the countries we look at? These become important questions because they're important questions to how do you sustain a government? And we have to ask other questions about, well, if you get a multi-party government or coalitional government, is it going to last longer or shorter? Now we're starting to ask some really kind of interesting questions, but those are questions that have been resolved by political scientists. All right, you owe me a literature review and you can go home. Thank you.